David Del Tredici is one of the banner names in composition of the 20th century, and just a composer in residence for the New York Philharmonic, and connections with teaching at Harvard and Yale and Juilliard, and such an amazing influence by his Alice music, by much of the rest of his composition, by his influence on many composers who are writing and sort of just hitting their stride today. And I'm very happy that when we invited him to come up, he said, yes, David Del Tredici is here. So if you'll help me welcome David. Testing. So it is really just an honor that you're here, and we met. I had talked to David one time, I don't know if you would recall, on the telephone about one of your students at Juilliard, Mason Bates, who has really gone on to become quite a great young composer. But we only met in person yesterday for the first time, and I'm so proud that we have taken on this project and are doing your piece. Maybe before we talk about the piece, let's let these folks get to know you just a little better. Tell us, how did you begin? How did music find you? And just a little, what are some things we should know about your career?
Well, it's wonderful to be here and have this very original performance of my piece. Is this on? Because it's never been done with the ballet, and I often dreamed of it being done with the ballet. I came from a very unmusical family, the oldest of 5 kids. I was an old child prodigy. That is to say, I started when I was 12 playing the piano, and when I was 17, I played concertos and recitals. And when I was 21, I thought practicing was a bore, so I started composing. And actually, it wasn't quite that so. I was at a music festival, the Aspen Festival, and I hated the piano teacher there who screamed at me. He was from New York, I was from California. And so I thought, what do I do for 6 weeks if I don't get joy out of playing the piano? I thought I could either sing or write a piece. So I wrote a piece. A friend said, why don't you play it at the composer seminar, which Darius Milhaud was in charge of, famous French composer. And so I played it for Darius Milhaud and his assembled class, and he said to me, my boy, you are a composer. So that was tremendous permission, and I went back to my senior year at the University of California, and it was composition from then on.
Wow. Milhaud was an early influence on you. Were there others? You were well connected to Aaron Copland, whom I mentioned as well. Yes.
Yes, he was a real mentor of mine. He was wonderful. For 20 years, I knew him. Met him at the Tanglewood Festival. Although mentor is not to say he never taught me, but just his presence and his way about music. It was interesting. I was teaching at Harvard at the time, and when I was at Harvard, everything seemed very complicated, very intellectual, and not really first rate when you compare it. So when I went to see Copland, who was definitely first rate, it was also simple. He said, just write what you feel and try it out. And I thought, which way do I go? The brain teasing way or the more happily connected to human beings way? And so I always had him as a model, and I tried to go his way, I'd say.
How would you just? You can turn mine down quite a bit. How would you describe your musical style? I know what I think when I think of the Alice Symphony, but in general, is there a Del Tredici style, and how would one describe it?
Well, yes, you can say that. I came to composition when atonality was very exciting. It was this green fog that came from Europe. People like Schoenberg and Berg and Weber were very exciting and totally threatening, I would say, to American composers, to this wholesome way of writing music, which we had. And I, like anyone my age at that time, was excited in doing it, and I did it for a long time. But at a certain point, I guess I was running out of steam, and someone gave me the Alice in Wonderland books and said, I think you'd like this. And I read a little, and I said, not for me. And then someone else showed me a book by someone named Martin Gardner called The Annotated Alice, which showed for each little ditty that Lewis Carroll wrote in the stories, there was an original poem of a Victorian style, which he was parodying, or there was something like it. Anyway, I got a whole, for each poem in the story, I got a kind of little world of other poems that fit it. And so little by little, I thought this was a unique situation to set a part of Alice in Wonderland, make it even like a little opera. And so I began. My style is that I, in a sense, destroyed another style. As I did Alice, gradually, the wit and the whimsy and the charm of the Victorian way and of Lewis Carroll's prose made me not, I just couldn't do it atonally anymore. I needed something else. And so I, without realizing it, started to use tonal chords. And I had been a pianist, of course, so I knew all that music, which was lush and gorgeous, and Chopin and Brahms. And so it somehow came back to me that I could use that, although at the time it was unthinkable that you could write this music again, make it live again. But I gradually did, and the piece that was sort of path-breaking for me was something called Final Alice, which was achingly tonal. And in the beginning I would get tonal chords and things, but they'd be covered by a sort of scrim of wrong notes, which made it more appropriately dissonant. But now with Final Alice, there were no wrong notes. And I even had a little nervous breakdown when I was writing it, saying, I can't go on like this, I have to be wrong notes. But they never came, and I went with my instinct, which said it's okay the way it is, your dominants and tonics will carry you. And so when it was finally premiered, the big concert with the Chicago Symphony, George Schulte, and a wonderful soprano named, what's her name, Barbara Hendricks, I was terrified that I just laughed off the stage, but it turned out to be the reverse. It was a big success, and it changed my style forever. I went from being a respected composer to a hated composer or a loved composer.
I might ask you to say just a little bit more about that. You made me think about this concept that during even going back to the sort of 1950s, 60s, 70s, it seems there was this sort of ethos in the air that to be taken seriously as a composer, you had to go after either the wrong notes, as you say, or you had to do things that maybe got away from the melody or a certain kind of tonality. At least that's, I think, the popular perception. Is there, and I feel in Alice Symphony, and I love Final Alice, I think you find times where you're able to marry the two, really. So is there one path that is correct and one that isn't, or is it up to the composer to sort of forge that forest?
It's totally personal and emotional. And it's interesting, now that you've been doing an Alice Symphony, I've thought about it again. Alice Symphony comes early, and it's the second Alice piece I wrote. In 1969, Final Alice came in 1976. So I was beginning, it was not that easy just to get tonal. It had to be like my tonality, and I was experimenting. A lot of this piece is actually 12-tone and atonal, but I harmonized things in a certain way that was tonal, but you kind of get away with it. The wrong notes are somewhere lurking. So I was trying to get there, and it's interesting to see how actually untonal this piece is.
Yeah. It is a fascinating piece, and I may say something like this to the audience upstairs, but I will tell you from my perspective as a person learning the score, if you haven't been to Disney World and rode Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, I'm not sure exactly that I have a frame of reference to connect you to what might be your initial sort of reaction. There's a carnival, wonderful craziness to the piece, beginning, for example, with the soprano soloist singing through a bullhorn into the microphone, and accompanied by two saxophones eventually who are just blaring out this amazing sort of hard rhythmic tune. Eventually there's an accompaniment from a folk ensemble, the saxophones plus a mandolin, a banjo, an accordion that plays a huge role in this piece. Later on in the percussion section, which you will see just a huge array of percussion, you will see and hear a wind machine, wind chimes, a siren, a theremin. So if everyone knows what a theremin is, it's going to make you feel like you're watching a little bit of Star Trek at some moment, but it's this wonderful electronic instrument back in the percussion section. And we haven't even talked about the addition of dance yet. Just the sounds themselves give this amazing psychedelic, I almost want to say, approach.
I love your description. We don't need music with your elegance.
One thing that players have mentioned quite a lot in the past few days, and we were talking even before you got here, we were talking about just the Alice story itself. and the conversation was, I don't know how else to say it, you know, what was Carroll thinking, okay, or smoking when he was writing? So loud. What was Carroll thinking, or whatever, when he was writing the piece? And of course that comes through in the Alice. We see sort of the story as understood from a child, but then there are all these levels. When you're working on the music, did you work to sort of echo that exactly?
Well, the interesting thing was in the very first piece, which he describes, which is so violent, with called Pig and Pepper, Carroll wrote the rough, speak roughly to your little child, but it's based on a Victorian ballad which goes, speak gently to your little child. And it's all these sweet Victorian things, but the Carroll makes fun of it. So that is what I like, to counterpoint something as loud as possible with something as soft as possible, and put them together. So it was really finding this other book which showed these originals, which made it come to life for me.
And that moment is great, because when the opening is speak roughly, speak gently, and during speak roughly, the horns are playing this rough and rugged sort of underpinning underneath one saxophone that's kind of blaring away along with the soprano and her bullhorn. Finally, a whip cracks in the percussion, and then when it gets to speak gently, it's basically a duet between soprano and clarinet. And they're not fighting each other, they're just conversing with each other in rhythms. Sometimes one of them will be exactly in rhythm with the meter of the piece, and the other will be in opposition. That is to say, the singer might be singing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, while the clarinet performs and plays 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they switch. So you'll hear and see this all the time. It's such a wonderful juxtaposition.
There were two ways I tried to show the craziness of Wonderland. One was to have this little folk group of mandolin, banjo, accordion, and 2 saxes, which when you see them and hear them, you know have nothing to do with a normal symphony orchestra. And the other was this device that Robert just mentioned, of having things go at the same time but slightly off. It's like a mistake. They're all moving the same, but you think, is that correct or not? Or to have somebody going slow to fast, and someone at the same time going fast to slow. So it all is a little bit cracked, I would say. And again, the idea being the technique itself is Wonderland.
And I got it backwards. I actually thought until really talking to you even just this morning, I thought that the story was that you had written so much Alice material back in the late 60s and 70s, and then when Oliver Nussin did a performance of Alice Symphony at Tanglewood, that you had put together for him kind of finally an amalgamation of this, but it's the opposite is true.
It was on my way
Yeah.
to tonality.
And so you wrote this in 1969, but you never heard a performance of it until...
Well, I said that to you this morning, but I realized I was wrong.
Okay.
I cut it up into pieces that I offered for commissioning, so I'd heard the different parts of it, but never all put together until...
Yeah. And he did the performance at Tanglewood maybe 15 years ago?
Yes.
Something like that. So it's a fascinating trajectory of this piece. Let me now tell you what makes tonight's performance unique. And now I will tell you it's not quite the premiere, because we did it twice this morning on our youth concerts. So this is the first time that this has been produced as a ballet and with ballet. So Portland Ballet is with us. Roberto Forleo, one of the choreographers with Portland Ballet, has choreographed a really wonderful take on the idea, and it's a bit of kind of a surrealist take. He's not trying to have the dancers look exactly at all like the White Rabbit or anything like that, or the Griffin. You shall see. He has a different take, and I think this will sort of become apparent to you. Since it is going to become apparent to you, I will tell you that we did something of, let's call a G-rated version of it for the students this morning. You're going to be a little bit more PG-13 this evening, just so you know. But it's just a really kind of it almost looks like the movie Moulin Rouge or something like that. It has a great feel to it. So it is being choreographed. There are, I think, 7 dancers. And I decided not to ask Roberto to come join us in the pre-concert talk since David was here, and also a wonderful soprano. Her name is Margaret Carpenter Haig. I've known her for quite a long time, studied in both North Carolina and then at Cambridge. She's now studying at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, but she's already begun quite a nice career as a singer of early music, quite a number of recordings of early French Baroque. But I find that the voice needed for early music is quite often the exact voice needed for wonderful music written in the late 20th century. And I think it's phenomenal the approach she takes. And if you're wondering what that high note is at the very end, it's a high E that you will hear her sing quite a number of times. So from, I think, a low G to a high E is the range of the soprano. Are there many who can even sing this role?
I don't know, I was a reckless youth when I wrote it.
So that's what we have to present to you tonight. It's really quite something. I think it's a very we have had and will always have amazing concerts of Beethoven and Tchaikovsky and Mozart and Ravel and. But what an experience tonight to hear these three works played together and to sort of hear and see what transpires in the way music can evolve. For those of you who have sent me emails and talked to me after concerts and found me in the town somewhere and said, we really want you to push doing new music. Can you do some new music for us? And can you play the modern composers, et cetera, tonight's your night. Yeah, tonight is really a grand celebration of that. And for those maybe who they stick with Beethoven and Mozart, don't worry, we're coming back. We got plenty of Mozart and Beethoven always ahead of us. But what a great opportunity to celebrate this kind of music and to do something that actually has never been done before, putting dance with this experience. The extra bonus, the icing on the cake, was that this amazing composer came up to Portland to check out this entire thing. So thank you, David Del Torrici, so much. We're going to go just 5 minutes early and get ready for this concert. It's a big undertaking, as you shall see, but thank you for being here, and we'll see you upstairs.